Happy New Year's Eve, everyone. Hope you're having a great night. Even with the bubbly chilling and fireworks ready to go, we're diving into something a little bit different tonight. Something you might find surprisingly relevant. Sweden's new In Case of Crisis or War pamphlet. They literally sent this to every household.
Wow.
Not just in Swedish, but in multiple languages, even Braille and sign language versions.
Yeah, I saw that.
What do you think? Is that commitment to accessibility or a sign of how seriously they're taking things?
I'd say it's both. It's fascinating, right? Sweden has this image of peace-loving neutrality, but clearly they're acknowledging that the world is getting less predictable.
Yeah. It's like they're saying, hey, let's be real, conflict disasters, those aren't just things that happen somewhere else anymore, but instead of just freaking everyone out, they lay out this idea of total defense. What struck you about that concept?
Well, it goes way beyond just military strength. Every citizen is expected to play a role supporting essential services, understanding how society functions under pressure. It's almost like a social contract they're renewing.
Okay, but how does that work in practice? Like if things escalate, there's actually a highest state of alert in their system. I'm picturing sirens blaring, is that right?
Yeah, you're not far off. Sweden has this outdoor warning system sirens covering the whole country, not just for air raids, but for different emergencies. They even have distinct sounds for each.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. A 7-second siren means a public service announcement, maybe a chemical spill or major fire.
Okay.
30 seconds means the whole country is on high alert, potential military threat.
Okay. I'm already getting chills.
Yeah.
What if it's the 1 minute long short bursts? The air raid siren.
That's when you need to act fast. Ideally, you're near one of their designated civil defense shelters, purpose-built to withstand pretty much anything.
Oh, wow.
But they also know you can't always get there, so they lay out alternatives.
Like, is it just run to the basement advice? Or do they get more specific?
More specific, and I gotta admit, kind of smart. Cellars are good. So are underground metro stations, tunnels, even a ditch if you're caught in the open. They're emphasizing reducing your exposure no matter what.
I'm starting to realize how practical this pamphlet is. It's not just theoretical doom and gloom. They're actually telling people, here's what you do step by step.
Exactly. And that extends to home preparedness too. They want every household to be self-sufficient for at least a week.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. What would you need to have on hand to manage for 7 days with no outside help?
Okay, water's obvious, but how much are we talking? I have a few bottles in the fridge. Is that going to cut it?
Not quite. They recommend 3 liters per person per day. Big containers are good, but here's a tip. Freeze water in plastic bottles.
Oh.
Instant ice packs if the power's out, and then they thaw for drinking water. Resourceful, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Water's covered. But staying warm is key too, especially this time of year. What do they say about that?
Warm clothes are a must. Layers, blankets, the works. Then alternative heating candles, but with fire safety warnings, of course. If you have a gas heater, make sure you have fuel. It's making me think about what I'd grab if I had to evacuate suddenly.
That go bag is sounding more essential by the minute. Speaking of what's on their list of must-haves for that.
Food and water, obviously, but also meds, especially prescriptions. Copies of important documents in case your phone dies. And something people often forget, a hand crank radio. If the power is out, that's your lifeline to information.
It's amazing how this is making me rethink even basic preparedness. I'm picturing my pantry now, and I need to step up my game.
That's the point, right? It's not about panicking, but realizing that even small steps make a difference. Like they encourage people to use what they have, grow some herbs, learn basic first aid. Every bit adds to your resilience.
Okay, this is getting me curious about their advice on other more delicate situations. What about, bathroom stuff if the plumbing's out?
They don't shy away from it. Toilet paper wipes, sanitizer are obvious, but then they get specific about waste disposal. Using plastic bags and sawdust separating waste to reduce odor.
Oh my gosh.
It's like camping, but on a whole other level.
Definitely not your average glamping trip. But it shows they've really thought this through. It's not just, oh, and by the way, you want to have a toilet. They give you solutions.
And that's part of what sets Sweden apart, I think. They're not just telling people what to fear, they're giving them the tools to feel empowered even in a crisis.
It's like they're saying, bad things might happen, but here's how we face them together.
Exactly, and that together part is key. They dedicate a whole section to helping others, especially those with special needs, making sure everyone's included in the plan.
Okay, before we get into that, I think we need to unpack this idea of total defense duty more. This is where it gets real, right? Like, am I suddenly expected to become a soldier if things go south?
Not necessarily a soldier, but total defense duty means that every citizen is legally obligated to contribute during a crisis. It's fascinating, this idea that everyone has a role to play, even if it's not on the front lines.
So what kind of roles are we talking about? Is everyone getting military training? Or is it more about keeping society running?
It's a mix. There's definitely a strong emphasis on military defense, protecting borders, supporting their NATO allies. But a huge part is ensuring essential services keep functioning. Healthcare, energy, transportation.
Right.
Imagine if the power grid went down. You'd need people who know how to get things back online.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about people who already rely on support systems? Folks with disabilities, the elderly. The pamphlet mentions them specifically, right?
They do, and this is where it gets really heartwarming. They emphasize that existing support systems will continue as much as possible during a crisis.
Okay,
But also, individuals need to proactively plan.
right.
Communicating needs to family care providers. Having a crisis plan that addresses specific requirements like medications or accessible transportation.
So it's about empowering those who might be more vulnerable to take control rather than just assuming the government will handle everything.
Exactly. And they provide resources too. Accessible shelters, notifications through the chrisinformation.se app, even text-to-speech tools for those who need them. It really highlights this sense of inclusivity. No one gets left behind.
What strikes me is how much of this relies on community, knowing your neighbors, being able to help each other out. Do you think that's a particularly Swedish thing? Or is this something we're seeing more globally as the world gets more unpredictable?
It's interesting, isn't it? Sweden has this long tradition of self-reliance, but also a strong social safety net.
Yeah.
So this idea of collective responsibility feels very much in line with their national character.
Okay.
But I do think it's a trend we're seeing elsewhere too. As people realize that in a crisis, sometimes your community is your best resource.
Yeah, it's like, forget stockpiling toilet paper. Maybe I should be stockpiling good relationships with my neighbors.
Right. A friendly face and a helping hand can be more valuable than a bunker full of supplies. But speaking of supplies, remember, they also talk about pet preparedness.
Oh, right. What do they say about keeping furry friends safe?
The basics. Food, water, meds, a carrier. But also thinking about shelter options. If you have to evacuate, can your pet come with you? Do you have a designated caregiver? It's making me realize how much we take for granted in our daily routines, things that could disappear in an instant.
It's definitely a lot to process. And honestly, some of the stuff, the sirens, the talk of war, it's kind of anxiety-inducing. Does the pamphlet address that at all, the mental and emotional toll of living with this level of awareness?
They do.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I appreciate most about their approach. They acknowledge that uncertainty can be stressful and offer coping strategies. Talking to loved ones, limiting news intake, focusing on positive activities. They even have a section on talking to children about crises, which I thought was really insightful.
Okay, that's something I struggle with. My kids are young and I don't want to scare them, but I also want them to be prepared. How do you even begin that conversation?
Well, they recommend tailoring it to the child's age. Being honest, but not overwhelming them with details.
Right.
Focus on creating a sense of safety. Having a plan makes them feel more secure, not scared. It's about empowering them, just like with adults.
That makes sense. It's about shifting the focus from fear to action, giving them something they can do rather than just worry.
Exactly. And remember, preparedness isn't about living in fear. It's about building resilience, both individually and as a community. It's about facing challenges head on, knowing you have the tools and the support to overcome them.
That's a powerful message, and I think it applies to so much more than just literal crises. It's about having a mindset of readiness for whatever life throws at you.
Absolutely. And this whole deep dive has got me thinking. Sweden's approach is obviously tailored to their specific context, but what can we learn from it no matter where we live? What resonates with you the most?
I think for me, it's that sense of like individual empowerment, mixed with the community spirit. It's like, the world's a bit messy right now, but instead of feeling helpless, they're saying, okay, here's what we can do about it. And not just like waiting for the government to save the day,
Yeah, that's such a key point. It reminds me of that old saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago.
Right.
The second best time is today. Preparedness isn't about predicting the future. It's about building the capacity to handle whatever comes your way.
And that's something we can all do, right? Whether it's learning basic first aid, having a plan for our pets, or just getting to know our neighbors better. It's not about becoming like a doomsday prepper or anything,
Right.
but just having that extra layer of resilience.
Exactly. It's like having a mental toolbox.
Yeah.
The more skills and resources you have in there, the more confident you feel facing the unknown.
Yeah.
And that sense of confidence, I think, is contagious. It spreads to your family, your community, and ultimately helps create a more resilient society as a whole.
It's funny, we started this deep dive talking about Sweden, but it's really gotten me thinking about my own life, my own community. What are we doing to prepare for the unexpected? What could we be doing better?
That's the beauty of a deep dive like this.
Yeah.
It's not just about absorbing information, it's about sparking those kinds of questions, those personal reflections, and honestly, that's where real change starts.
So as we head into this new year, maybe instead of resolutions, we should be making preparations.
I like that.
Little steps like checking our smoke detectors, updating our emergency contacts, or, hey, even just baking some extra cookies to share with the neighbors.
I love that. It's not about living in fear. It's about embracing the reality that life is unpredictable and choosing to face that unpredictability with a spirit of resourcefulness and community.
And you know what? That feels a lot more empowering than just hoping for the best. It's like we're taking control, saying, bring it on 2025, we're ready for you.
Cheers to that. And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. Here's to a new year filled with awareness, connection, and maybe just a little bit of preparedness just in case.
Happy New Year, everyone.